How are you going to move to the center to compete and win? How do you go from a more left socialist structure, a more strident progressive structure, and capture centrist votes?
With as many Bloomberg interviews as possible.
That's the right answer. Okay, continue. You can stay.
It's a real pleasure to be here. I think one of the key ways is explaining how the crises that we are speaking about, whether it's on affordability and understanding it with regards to housing or childcare or public transit, these are crises that are affecting New Yorkers wherever they identify politically, whether on the left or in the center or even on the right. And I've found that while I don't believe there's an ideological majority in our city of any one political persuasion, I do think there's a majority of New Yorkers who have been left behind by the economic policies of this mayoral administration and of politics today. And this is what this campaign seeks to confront in a politics that requires no translation.
I can see it now, though. Sort of to Tom's question, the painting of you as a democratic socialist or even a socialist. How do you avoid the label, or do you embrace the label? Do you make it so centrists are not scared away by that?
I embrace the label because ultimately I do identify myself as a democratic socialist. And I think that the thing that New Yorkers hate more than a politician they disagree with is one that they cannot trust. And I think it's important to be honest about how we're coming to this politics and also what that label means to me, which is ultimately that each and every New Yorker has what they need to live a dignified life, and that it's city government's responsibility to provide that. And I think we have a general consensus on many of those building blocks in our society, whether it's public education or libraries or sanitation. But then there are certain places where we tend to believe that these are necessary parts of living a dignified life, and yet we allow people to be priced out of it. And I think housing is one of the most obvious examples of that. So
let's talk about that. What is your policy for increasing affordability and increasing supply of housing? Because no question, that is the issue. Supply of housing. That is why it's expensive here.
Absolutely. And I think what we're seeing is that when you ask New Yorkers if they were to pick one of the many crises they're facing in their life, it's the housing crisis that tends to predominate. And, I think that what we need to do, there are a few things we need to do in terms of allowing the private market to play a more significant role in the construction of additional housing supply. That includes ending the requirement to build parking lots when we're constructing housing. That means increasing density around mass transit hubs. That means upzoning wealthier neighborhoods that have historically not contributed to housing production. What makes our campaign distinct is in tandem with that. I also believe that the public sector has a role to play in building immediately affordable housing. And the reason I say immediately, sorry, please.
With the time that we've got, I got to get into two themes. The reality is labor's going down in flames in the United Kingdom, and there is a wealth exit from the United Kingdom. If we have Mayor Mamdani, do we get a wealth exit from New York City?
No, I think what we actually get is an end to the exodus we're seeing right now of working and middle-class New Yorkers leaving our city in the hopes of finding a place where their dollar can go a little bit further. And what we know is that it's housing, it's childcare, it's general cost of living. And so often when I speak about our campaign to make the city more affordable, to freeze the rent, to make buses fast and free, to deliver universal childcare, sometimes it's framed oppositional to that of, let's say, business interests. But oftentimes when I speak to business owners, one of their primary concerns is how to retain their employees in a city that's so expensive. And I think that these are proposals that will make the city not only more affordable, but also more livable, because there are so many knock-on consequences of having a city that's out of reach. There's a real sense of almost permanent anxiety that New Yorkers are living in. Zohran, and this addresses that.
One of the great themes right now of all the 28 flavors of candidates we've spoken to is crime. And the great theme is, how do we re-find 3,000 New York Police Department officers? Are you in support of stabilizing and increasing the number of police officers in New York City?
So I'm in support of stabilizing, and I've said time and again that I think the ultimate concern has to be delivering public safety, and police have a critical role to play in that. Yet what we're doing right now is relying on them for almost every failure of the social safety net, a reliance which is preventing them from doing their actual jobs. And we can see the results of that in our inability to increase our clearance rates for the major 7 categories of crime. And so what we've put forward as a proposal is to create a Department of Community Safety that would tackle the mental health crisis, homelessness, gun violence, hate violence, and victim services, doing so in a manner that's aggressively pursuing evidence-based policies that have proven successful elsewhere in the country and allowing police to focus on their actual jobs.
Free buses, increased childcare, more housing. How do you pay for it all?
So I think there are a few key ways. We've put forward a revenue proposal that seeks to raise about $10 billion a year. Now, about $9 billion of that comes from increased taxes on $5 billion from the most profitable corporations in New York State. We would tax the top level of corporate tax would match that of New Jersey, where across the river they have an 11.5% top corporate tax rate. Here in New York, we have a 7.25% top corporate tax rate. And then we'd raise $4 billion by raising income taxes on the top 1% of New Yorkers. These are New Yorkers who make $1 million a year or more by a flat 2% increase. So this would just be about $20,000.
I've got to get this in, Zohran, and we're out of time, but this is too important. You are on the cusp of the national resurgence of the Democratic Party. Is your voice, the senator from Vermont and other voices, a gentlewoman from the Bronx, is that the future of the Democratic Party? Or is the future of the Democratic Party centrist, more towards a tradition from the last century?
You know, I would argue that my voice and the voice that of so many others that you've cited, whether Senator Sanders or Congressman Ocasio-Cortez, is very much still in the tradition of the Democratic Party. And I think so much of what we are also speaking about is seeking to learn the lessons, whether it's of the New Deal or also in New York City specifically, of Little Flower, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, and how the public sector was so critical in providing dignity in working people's lives. And we're seeking to bring that back because too many working class New Yorkers and Americans rightfully feel that they've been betrayed and left behind. And it's time for us to deliver that which they have so long been denied.